All right, so now let's dive in a little bit deeper and talk about the way information comes into and goes out of the system. I'm going to start with a discussion of the big picture. We're going to take a look at this from the very top. And so if you look at the image that's on your screen right now, you'll see that the entire process is kicked off by an information model. We've talked about information models. We'll go through another one in just a moment. The idea is the information model figures out what kinds of information we have, what each piece of that kind of information has to contain. So if we have a song, that song's going to contain a title, it's going to contain a run length, etc. And we figure out what the nature of our information is and how to organize that information. That's all review. We've talked about that before. That information model actually doesn't end up as part of the end information system. Instead, the information model is translated into a database, and the database is the thing that goes forward into the information system. So we start with a model. The model is a conceptual idea of what kind of information we have and how it's organized. We encode that into a database. We turn it into a database design, and now we move into this circle, round and round and round the circle, inputting information into the system, storing that information, and then displaying information. So let me walk one time around this cycle. I'll start from the database, but really I could start from anywhere in this cycle, but let's start from the database. There's information in the database. Our system makes a query. We've talked about queries before. It makes a query against the information in the database, and that retrieves certain information in the database. That information needs to be transformed from its form in the database, which I've said is very compact and very dense and not very human readable, into a form that people can deal with. Not all the information in the database, just a small amount. Not even all the fields in a certain database table, but only the right fields to show a person in a particular place to give them what they want. So there's this process of querying, getting the information out of the database, and transformation, where we transform what we got out of the database into something that our end user can understand, can relate to, can read, can be interested in, can use to navigate, whatever it is the purpose you have for the information in the end user. So once it's transformed, it's delivered into the user interface. And the user interface does exactly what it says. It is an interface between the user and, really, in the end, the database. The user is consuming information from the database and putting new information into the database, and the user interface is there to make that process work as well as possible. Okay, so we're in the user interface. Some information has been delivered by the database to the user interface through the system, and I'll talk about the different tiers in a moment here, through the system, and now the user has consumed it. And let's say now the user wants the next piece of information, or the user wants to add information to the database. The user takes some action in the user interface. They fill in a form, let's say, and by filling in the form, they're providing new information to the system. They submit that form, meaning they give their information to the system in some way, and then some process happens. The process, generally speaking, is one where we validate the information, we make sure it's all the information, we make sure it's the right information, and we make sure that it's ready to go into the database. So that's what processing is about. It's about checking the information to make sure it's okay to go into the long-term storage. And then, of course, it gets stored in the long-term storage. And then the cycle repeats. Depending on what the person stored or what the person requested in the user interface, a new query is run against the database. More stuff comes out of the database. It's transformed once again and goes back to the user. This is a very general cycle that really describes any information system, and one that, if you keep in your back pocket, is always going to give you insight into an information system that other people won't have. Before moving off this slide, let me talk a little bit about the relation of the cycle to the tiers. Notice that each of the tiers transects or goes right through the middle of one of the cycle pieces. So, for example, transformation can happen a little bit on the processing tier, a little bit on the presentation tier. It's not, for different systems, it happens in different ways. Similarly, querying can happen partially on the data tier, partially on the processing tier. It doesn't always happen the same way. So the tiers are one way of saying, in general, data happens over here, but understand that the specific functions that the system performs can really be performed part way in one tier, part way in another tier. So the tiers and the processes really don't always map together in a single system.